This is a video presentation of adding and subtracting integers. Now what you see on the screen right now is obviously a lot different than what you see in your note-taking guide. What we're going to go through first is a basic explanation of why things are what they are in terms of adding and subtracting. So let's start off with the type of question that you're absolutely certain about, the thing you've been doing forever. A question like 3 plus 2. 3 plus 2 equals 5. So if we take a look at how that comes about on a number line, we would start at 3 on the number line since the first number is 3, and the plus 2 on the number line made me go 2 jumps to the right, and I ended up at 5, which is exactly what we said our solution was. What's more important, though, is what we actually did here. What did we do? Well, I added. And what did I add? Beyond the concept of just 2, what I added was a positive number. So now that we know I'm adding a positive number, we can then associate that with something on the number line. We know that when I add a positive number, that means I'm going to move to the right on the number line, just like I did with these 2 jumps. So adding a positive makes me move to the right on the number line. And that understanding helps us generate all the other understandings for all the different types of adding and subtracting problems they can give us. Let's take a look at the next idea here we can have. Let's go ahead and take a look at, let's say, 1 plus negative 4. You can really pick any problem we want here. But let's talk about what we're doing here. We're adding this time a negative number. Well, let's think about it. Adding a positive made me move off to the right on the number line. We know that positives and negatives are opposites of each other, so it wouldn't make sense to say that adding a negative would also move to the right on the number line. Well, the only other way to go is to then go left. So adding a negative makes us move to the left on the number line. Well, now that we understand that adding a negative makes me move to the left on the number line, let's solve this problem. 1 plus negative 4. I'd start off at 1, and since we already know we're going to move to the left, and this other number is 4, I'm going to move left 4 spaces. 1, 2, 3, 4. Where did I end up? Well, I ended up at negative 3. So that means 1 plus negative 4 must be negative 3. Now, let's go back to some basics, things we're absolutely certain about. Let me give you a question like 8 minus 2. Well, we know 8 minus 2. 8 minus 2 is, again, something we're absolutely certain about, things we've been doing forever. 8 minus 2 is 6. Well, let's see what that does on the number line. That means this time I'm going to start at 8. Since we're going towards 6, which is our answer, that means I had to move 2 units to the left on the number line. Well, that's interesting because there was already something that made me go to the left on the number line. Adding a negative made me go to the left on the number line. But I didn't add here. What did I do here? I subtracted a positive number. But it made me go to the left on the number line. So subtracting a positive is also going to make me move to the left. Well, that's interesting. There's 2 things now that make me go to the left. So what type of problem do I have left then? Well, that means the other thing I could have left to do would be to subtract a negative. So let's go ahead and take a look here at negative 11 minus negative 3, which is, again, the only option I have left, subtracting a negative. Well, again, let's talk about opposites here. We already know where subtracting a positive is. Subtracting a positive is off here to the left. As odd as that seems, because we're on the negative sign, but what word did I use? Positive. Well, positives and negatives are opposites of each other. So it wouldn't make sense to say subtracting a negative is going to make me go this way. Subtracting a negative is going to have to make me go the other way, to the right. But we also have something already that's off on that right side, adding a positive. So somehow those two things must be related. Well, let's get an answer here. If I start at negative 11, and then I'm going to subtract negative 3. Well, again, we've already figured out that subtracting a negative is going to make me go to the right, so I'm going to make 3 jumps off to the right here. And where did I end up? Negative 8. So now we see the basic setup here. We see what adding a positive does, what subtracting a negative does, what adding a negative does, and what subtracting a positive does. We can use those taking a look at every single problem. But what we have here is one really important fact about these relationships, that adding a positive and subtracting a negative, even though they're different operations, must somehow be the same thing. And adding a negative and subtracting a positive, even though, again, they're different operations, must be the same thing. Which leads us to one of the things we're going to do in almost all of our problems today, whether we solve it with this method or whether we solve it with the absolute value method. When we solve subtraction problems, we're always going to change them into adding the opposite. Well, think about why that works. If I change it into adding the opposite, subtracting a negative would become adding, again, opposite here, opposite of negative is a positive. Well, look what else is on this side. Adding a positive. So subtracting a negative and adding a positive are the same thing. Same thing over here. I'm going to change this into adding the opposite when it's subtraction. So when I do that, this becomes addition, and I do the opposite of positive, which is negative. Well, notice what else is written here. Adding a negative. Interesting, those two things are the same thing. But what happens when we change those, more importantly, is it narrows down this list of rules. I don't have to think so much about subtracting a positive and subtracting a negative when I change it. All I have to worry about then are my adding rules. And we only have 2 adding rules. Adding a positive makes me go to the right. Adding a negative makes me move towards the left. It doesn't matter what that first number is. That's really irrelevant. It's only the operation, and what's after it is what's going to make me do different things here.